Thank you, Lascian Corla. Taoiseach, this week the government published two reports: the establishment of hospital groups as transition to independent hospital trusts, and the other one, securing the future of smaller hospitals. Now, we welcome the fact that they were published, and there was broad consultation with the professionals that carry out and deliver the services on a daily basis over the last number of years. But, Minister, it's not exactly earth-shattering either, to be quite truthful. And when you actually look and drill down through the actual report itself, it is a continuation of what was happening and what was rolling out in terms of reconfiguration over the last number of years. The difficulty I have when you actually look through particularly the Securing Future Small Hospitals report, is that there certainly isn't a commitment to secure the future of every small hospital in this country. And we are now talking about having a consultation process with the stakeholders and the broader public. And yet there's a lot of spin and PR coming from government that this is guaranteed to secure the future of all small hospitals. Now, your track record in this Taoiseach isn't great. We can see what happened in regards to Roscommon. We saw the abandonment of the 500-bed North East hospital proposal that was committed to by Fine Gael prior to the last election. But we now find that there is a downgrading of Our Ladies in Navan from 24-hour emergency cover. They're taking out the IC unit. And what I'm saying, Minister, is if we are to have a genuine debate and have honesty in this, we need to know exactly what the government is proposing with regard to Navan. Now, Taoiseach, huge commitments were made in Navan. Promises were made about retaining services 24-hour. And the reason they said they were important to retain was that it would save lives. We now have a situation where you are saying quite clearly in this report that is going to be downgraded. And this has happened across the country with regard to other small hospitals as well, Taoiseach. So the key question here I'm asking today is, are you going to give a commitment to the people in Navan that 24-hour emergency cover will remain in the hospital and that there will be no downgrading of services, as was stated and promised by the Minister for Health in 2011? And I just want to know, will you live up to the commitment? Will he ensure that those services are retained and the broader services in the North East?
Thank you, Deputy. Taoiseach.
Well, as the Deputy is aware, on Tuesday the Minister for Health brought proposals to Government which will result in the reorganisation of public hospitals into more efficient and accountable hospital groups that will deliver improved outcomes for patients. This represents the most fundamental reform of the Irish acute hospital system in decades. Professor Higgins' report on hospital groups is based on a comprehensive consultation process and contains almost 60 recommendations on the formation, management and governance of hospital groups. The Minister has taken very seriously his obligation to consider the report closely to ensure himself and Cabinet and the public that it provides a robust basis to enable timely access to a high quality and sustainable hospital service for those who need it. The objectives of the groups are to achieve the highest standard of quality and uniformity in hospital care across the group, to deliver cost-effective hospital care in a timely and sustainable manner, to encourage and support clinical and managerial leaders, and to ensure high standards of governance, both clinical and corporate, and recruit and retain highly qualified nurses, NCHDs, consultants, allied health professionals and administrators for all of our hospitals. The introduction of the groups will provide for organisational change in the first instance, giving more autonomy and better enabling the reorganisation of services in a well-planned manner. Over time, this will help improve services and deliver better outcomes for patients. Minister Riley facilitated a number of briefings on Tuesday in relation to that, including with members of the Oireachtas, and I know that there are quite a number of members of the House who welcomed the fact that they had the opportunity of hearing first-hand from Professor Higgins on what the strategic group's recommendations are. On Tuesday, the Minister for Health also published Securing the Future of Smaller Hospitals, which offers a clear information about the role of our smaller hospitals and what they will do in the future. The framework focuses in particular on the role of 9 smaller hospitals. In developing the framework to address the development of smaller hospitals, the Government is clear that there is an important future role for smaller hospitals in which they will provide services for more patients, not fewer patients. No acute hospital will close, and safety issues in all acute hospitals large or small, must be fully addressed by providing the right type of service for the right patient and the right setting. And this framework will demonstrate clearly that the future of smaller hospitals is secure. It will set out what services can and should be delivered safely by these hospitals in the interest of better outcomes for patients. The implementation of the hospital group's report will begin immediately. The Minister intends to seek and appoint chairs of each group within the next 2 months. Advertisements to seek other board members will be placed in parallel with the process of appointing the group chairs and the subsequent appointment of group CEOs and management teams. All appointments will be made based on the competencies that the individual brings to the board, in line with the HICWA report on TALA, and will obviously refer to representation of geographical areas as well. Once formed, the groups will prepare, within the first year of their formation, a strategic plan for the delivery of services in their group. These strategic plans will determine the way services are provided within each group. The operation of each group will then be rigorously reviewed in the second year of their operation, including all necessary due diligence checks to see whether they are in a position to advance to hospital trust status during 2015. These reviews may lead to changes in the composition of the trusts versus the traditional groups as decided by government. This is as it should be. The announcement, I think, represents a major milestone in the health reform programme, and the government is confident that the new groups will deliver a more effective and efficient hospital service for all patients in all parts of the country.
Supplementary question.
Taoiseach, if you believe what you just read out, it means that you were making things up 2 years ago, because what you were saying there is clearly at variance with what was stated prior to the last election with regard to small hospitals. And let's be honest about this. I mean, if we're talking about genuine reform, if you're talking about establishing hospital trusts, we're talking about having engagement with the public and they having confidence in services, at least be honest with them. And the people in Navan, for example, are a case in point. We have already highlighted the issue of Roscommon. But what we need is fundamental trust between government and the people in terms of delivery of services. And unfortunately, Minister Taoiseach, there's more rhetoric than there is reform. There's nothing happening other than reduction of services to the people of Our Ladies in Navan. And what we're saying is, if there is to be reform and engagement between all political parties, broader society and stakeholders, the government must be honest in its dealings with them. And in Navan, the North East, there is a fundamental withdrawal of services. It's gone from 24-hour to 12 hours emergency care. ICU is being withdrawn. And other services will be withdrawn as well. And that clearly will undermine the confidence in the discussions of this particular issue. And he campaigned on promises. But being honest, all you govern is on broken promises. Week after week after week. Can I get an assurance that there will be no downgrading? No downgrading of services in Our Lady of Lourdes. And can I also get a commitment from the Minister for Health when he arrives with regard to the new hospital for the North East? Where has that commitment gone? The 500-bed hospital for the North East that was meant to be built in advance of any reduction of services in Navan, a solemn promise by the Minister for Health.
Thank you, Deputy.
And Taoiseach, are you supporting the downgrading of Navan, or are you going to stand with the people as you pledged?
Taoiseach.
Well, what we do know about the situation prior to the election is that our hospital services were a mess. And you had an opportunity. You had an opportunity for the and your party had an opportunity for the 14 years that you were in government, when there was plenty of money available to deal with the reform of our hospitals, and you didn't do so. Now, what this government is doing is we are reforming our hospital services. We are appointing hospital groups. These groups are centred on the teaching hospital, on the universities that they are linked with, on the medical schools that they are linked with, and the smaller hospitals within that catchment will then be tied in to those larger hospital groups. This is about making best use of the hospital services. Where you have, for example, where is the best place to have the major equipment, the major concentration of specialists, and then how do you use the smaller hospitals to do the elective? The reform is being done, Deputy, and this is one of the things. And don't try to try and scratch around the reports that have been published, to try and find something in desperation that you can find wrong. It's taken you. You're the health spokesperson for your party. On Tuesday, when this was published, your attitude to it rightly was to be broadly supportive of it. You've now spent 2 days. You've now spent 2 days trying to scratch through to see if there's something that you can find in it that you can It's not pretty. It's not. It's not. It's not very convincing. What is being done here is our hospitals are being reformed in a modern way. You failed for 14 years to reform our hospital services. This government is going to reform our hospitals and provide a better quality of hospital care to the people of this country.
I now call Deputy Pádraig McLaughlin. Please, order. Now, I want to order for Deputy Pádraig McLaughlin.
Taoiseach, as you know well, it's not always a good thing for police to investigate police. That's why we've seen the establishment of the Garda Ombudsman, to reassure the public of independent examinations of concerns that are raised with them. Taoiseach, we had 2 Gardaí in this state, very courageous men, who came across issues of serious concern, investigated the matter further, brought these issues of concern to their Gardaí superiors and hit a wall. No formal investigation. In exasperation and frustration, they then brought those concerns out into the public domain. Now, what has happened to them? Remember that our economy and our state was brought into bankruptcy because there was too many people who didn't blow the whistle and shout stop. Now, Transparency Ireland last night put out a statement talking about the treatment of these 2 whistleblowers, these courageous men who have been isolated, who have been put aside. One of them has had to leave the force in relation to these allegations. Now, Garda morale, as you know, Taoiseach, is on the floor. There's 140 Garda stations closed across the state in recent times. There are thousands of Gardaí that have retired and not been replaced. There are hundreds of Garda vehicles that have been removed. The GRA, for the first time in their 35-year history, did not invite the Minister of Justice of the day to be at their conference. That is the environment we are in. Yet when 2 Gardaí step up to the plate, 2 Gardaí who love what they do, who believe in fairness and justice, consistency of the law, raise issues of concern, they are brushed aside, left aside, criticised and isolated. What will you do to reassure the men and women who are listening today and over the last few days, who are working in the public and private sector, who are considering speaking out about concerns they have? What will you do to reassure them that they will not be treated the same way these 2 Garda whistleblowers have been treated in this shameful affair?
Thank you, Deputy Taoiseach.
Well, first of all, can I say that the issue which has been raised here, which is about the fixed charge penalty points, when serious allegations were made last September that some Gardaí had improperly cancelled fixed charge notices in respect of road traffic offences, the Minister for Justice asked the Garda Commissioner to investigate those allegations. The Garda Commissioner, in turn, had an investigation conducted, it's produced a report, and the Minister for Justice has published that report. Now, I think it's important that we stand back and look at what we are talking about here. For most people, their only contact with the Gardaí, with the enforcement of the law, is likely to be in relation to a road traffic offence. It's likely to be because they've been caught on camera speeding or doing something which breaches the road traffic laws, or they're stopped by a Garda. In this case, there were about 1.4 million fixed charge penalty point notices which have been issued. In some of those cases, less than 5% of them, they were cancelled. Some of those cancellations, about half of that in turn, was for technical reasons. It was because the speed sign was in the wrong place, or they got the wrong car, or whatever the case was, and they were cancelled. In turn, there were a number of others that were cancelled due to common sense decisions that were made by Gardaí. Somebody, for example, who might be, in a rush to a hospital or whatever. There were some cases, however, where there are questions to be answered, where, for example, Garda officers issued cancelled fixed penalty points outside their own area of jurisdiction, or where there is no documentary evidence as to why the cancellation took place. The government takes, and the Minister for Justice takes, those cases quite seriously, and that is why he made it very clear, following the publication of the report, that there can be no question of a doubt be hanging over the fixed charge, the penalty points system. People have a right to believe that that is being administered fairly and impartially, and that there's no kind of inside track for anybody. He made it very clear, and he set out 7 principles that will guide the administration of that system in the period going forward. That there can be no question mark hanging over the integrity of the fixed charge notice system and the application of penalty points. No individual should receive preferential treatment because of their perceived status, relationship or celebrity. The law and any discretionary application to it to individuals must be administered fairly, with compassion and common sense. No member of the Garda force should feel compelled by any person's position, relationship or celebrity status to treat that person any more or less favourably than anybody else. There must be a proper oversight and transparency to the discretionary decision-making process, and the applicable rules and procedures must be fully complied with. All statutory provisions, regulations, rules, protocols, etc. must be readily accessible, and where application is made to terminate a fixed ticket charge, where possible and appropriate, material to support any application made should be sought, while understanding in some circumstances that no material may exist or be obtainable. He has referred that to these new procedures to the Garda Inspectorate. The report that he has published is being referred here to an Oireachtas committee for its examination, and separate to that, the Controller and Auditor General is conducting an audit into the way in which the system operates.
Deputy McLaughlin, a supplementary question.
Taoiseach, it's been a bad week for senior Gardaí. This week, the Garda Ombudsman published a 7-page summary into the public interest investigation into the Gardaí, and expressed concern that the recommendations from the Morris Tribunal around the handling of informers, very serious issues that arose at that time, have not been implemented by An Garda Síochána. So the senior Gardaí were challenged on that, and about not cooperating fully. In only 17 of 62 information requests was the information submitted back within 30 days. So going across all of that. Minister, when these issues were brought to the senior Gardaí's attention and to your colleague, the Minister for Justice, attention, they chose to batten down the hatches rather than let in the light. Will you now allow an independent examination of the allegations? Will you allow somebody independently to speak to the 2 Garda whistleblowers, to look over the documentation and look at this issue independently, so we can reassure the public that the concerns of the Ombudsman, as I spoke about in the last week, and the concerns of these 2 Garda whistleblowers are dealt with, and that the overwhelming majority of Gardaí, who give so much for us every day, who are struggling with huge wage cuts, with huge reduction in resources, that they can go out with their head held high and not be let down by the failure of their senior colleagues to open up the windows and let the light in.
Margaret Taoiseach, final reply on this question.
Well, the windows are being opened and the light is being let in. There is a report. The There was an investigation into the allegations. There is a report which has been published into that. That report is being referred to the Oireachtas Committee. The Oireachtas Committee are free to invite in the two Garda officers concerned to hear them directly, are free to invite in whatever senior Garda personnel they want to invite in to respond and to explain what is happening. The Minister for Justice has referred to the Garda Inspectorate, the principles that I have laid out and the new procedures, new enhanced procedures in relation to the operation of the fixed penalty point system. He's referred that to the Garda Inspectorate so that they will oversee the implementation of the new procedures, and secondly, that they will report back to it. In addition to that, the Controller and Auditor General, as I've said, is conducting an audit into this. And the place for these issues now to be examined is at the Oireachtas Committee, where the representatives, the elected representatives of the people of Ireland, whom the Gardaí serve very well, and to whom ultimately we are all, and all public services are ultimately accountable. That is the place where these issues, where the windows, as you say, are opened and the light is let in and these issues are discussed. As far as the Minister for Justice is concerned, as far as the government is concerned, these issues have been, the report has been published, it's been put to the Oireachtas Committee, and the Oireachtas Committee is now free to take that forward to do whatever further questioning and further examination it wants to do and feels appropriate to do, and to do it in public, where everybody can see it.
Margaret Taoiseach, I now call on Deputy John Pelican.
Thank you, Lascombe Corda. Taoiseach, there is something deeply reprehensible to what's happening to disabled people in this country. They have sustained a fundamental attack on their quality of life over the last 2 years. Their disability allowance has been cut. They have their home help hours and personal assistance cut. The domiciliary care allowance has been targeted, along with funding therapies for people with disabilities. And the respite care grant, as we know in the last budget, has been cut. Taoiseach, there are 128 people that I know with disabilities who also have the mobility allowance. And as with thousands of people around the country, many of these are deeply fearful as to what will happen with their allowance come the end of June. If you speak to groups around the country, this is fast becoming a human rights issue. Taoiseach, I understand that the working group appointed by the Department of Health on the mobility grants issue has now completed an interim report and is now looking at, I quote, as they say, the best use of the allowance monies. I'm told that the Department of Health has received a memo for other departments in order to consider how best we should feed back into this interim report. And this is coming to the government for consideration, I'm told reliably, next week at your cabinet meeting. Can you, Taoiseach, confirm, first of all, whether the recent Department of Health consultation for the mobility allowance has indeed concluded, and whether you have read the memo and seen the interim report? The final payment under the current scheme falls due the end of June, so the government decision on this issue is undoubtedly imminent. Can you also confirm whether the project group has recommended a solution on this issue, and whether these recommendations will be implemented before the end of June, in time for the existing scheme? And Taoiseach, can you confirm whether representatives of all the disabled citizens groups were consulted by this review group?
Thank you, Deputy.
My information is that they were not. Would you not think that it is essential that the voices of people with disabilities are heard in this process? Finally, Taoiseach, the cumulative effect of cuts to allowances in services for disabled people is leaving people all over the country disillusioned, marginalised, ghettoised. The cost-cutting measures have radically changed disabled persons' people on how they integrate into society. I would ask you, Taoiseach, we have a few weeks left before a decision is made on this allowance. thousands of people all over the country are worried, disillusioned, disenfranchised, and so are their families. We need clarity on this now, not on the week that the allowance is due, when it may very well be cut. We need to give people a month's notice at least as to what will happen with the 10.8 million, a relatively small sum of money, towards people in society who are less well off, who are disenfranchised, who have a burden to bear that very many of us will maybe never have to bear, and also their families bear this burden. We need clarity on this issue today.
Well, first of all, I want to say that the government is very conscious that there are many people who cannot access public transport and who rely on supports such as the Mobility Allowance and the motorised transport payments for their mobility and transport needs. We're also conscious, of course, of the Ombudsman's reports and her recommendations, which show that the scheme has been operating outside the law for about 12 years. A project group was established to look at how best to meet the needs of people who rely on these supports and to report back within 3 months. The draft report is with the Minister for Health, and I understand that it is his intention to bring that report to the government in the near future. You asked me specifically if I had seen the memo. I haven't, and I won't until the Minister brings it to government. We have made it clear that the funding for the mobility allowance and the motor transport payments, that funding remains ring-fenced, but the requirement we have is to place it on a legal footing. And the challenge here is to find a solution which will best meet these needs within the budget that is available. Now, at the recent meeting of the Joint Committee on Public Service Oversight and Petitions, both Minister Riley and Minister Kathleen Lynch outlined the real dilemma faced by the Department of Health with respect to these two schemes. It's not a funding matter, it's a legal matter. On the one hand, the Ombudsman has identified that both of the schemes are not compliant with the Equal Status Acts, and that in effect they've been operating outside the law for about 12 years. On the other hand, the extension of either scheme, as recommended by the Ombudsman, would create serious financial pressure on the health budget. And as you know, we're not in a financial position to do that right now, and it wouldn't be sustainable. Broader consultation was undertaken as part of the project group's work in order to ensure that as wide a range of views as possible were taken into account. I'm not aware of any interest group that was not consulted, but if the Deputy has some interest group that has an observation to make on it and feel that they haven't been heard to date, I'm sure that Minister Riley and Minister Lynch will be very happy to hear from them. In seeking a solution to address the transport and mobility needs of those who require these supports, we are concerned, of course, about the group of people who are currently benefiting under these schemes. But we also have to consider the broader group whose needs the Ombudsman has recommended that they must be looked after on an equitable basis. I am confident that we can find a solution which will best meet these needs within the budget available.
Deputy, I think in 1 minute.
Taoiseach, I'm shocked that you would think yourself that 10.8 million would put such financial strains on the health budget to very many people who are most marginalised in society. And could I say to you that the mobility allowance is not about going to work or to a supermarket and back. It's a broader picture. It's about access, integration, independence, human rights and equality. That's what these people see this mobility allowance as being about. And I have to say, I don't believe that you as a person would be insensitive or in any way dismissive to people that are most vulnerable in society. But I think it's important that many of us, and I'm sure you yourself as a TD and as a minister, would have met people on mobility allowance and been in homes, as I have, I've been in 128 homes. I make it my business before I do Leader's Question to check out all my facts and figures and to meet people. And these people feel marginalised. These people feel that they're being treated insensitively. These are people that do not have the same mobility, put simplistically, as we have. They need that extra little bit of help. And any attempts to even cut or consider cutting of a budget of 10.8 million, I would have to come back to my original word, is reprehensible. I would be deeply disappointed in yourself, in the Labour Party, and I'm not here to make any derogatory attacks on the Labour Party or yourself, you know that, I'm not that type of a person, but I think these people who are most vulnerable, there's a few thousand people who suffer terribly and of not being able to move from their own home. And a very small amount of money for the Minister of Health, I don't think they're your words, it's the Minister of Health to say that this would take a cut or a huge cut into the budget. I think this would be offensive to very many people in Ireland if that remark wasn't withdrawn.
Margaret Taoiseach, final reply on this question.
Well, first of all, let me be absolutely clear about this. There is no cut in the 10.8 million which is allocated for these purposes. No, let's deal with the facts. As far as the government is concerned, the government has always been quite satisfied to continue the mobility allowance and the motorised transport scheme. That has always been our position. But this isn't something the government is not seeking to end the mobility allowance and the motorised transport scheme. What has happened here is that the Ombudsman has found that the operation of those schemes does not comply with the terms of the Equal Status Acts, and she has recommended that they be widened to a much wider catchment than those who currently have them. The financial consequence of that would be that the budget which exists at the moment, which is about the figure I have is 10.6 million, but we won't argue over the decimal point on it, that the cost of the extension, as recommended by the Ombudsman, would be to raise that from 10.6 million to 100 million in the case of the mobility allowance and 200 million over a 3-year period for the motorised transport grant. Now, what we are seeking to do, what we are seeking to do, is to find a solution which, without any reduction, there will be no reduction in the money that has been allocated. As I've said earlier, the money that has been allocated for these two schemes, that money is ring-fenced. No reduction in it. What we are trying to do is to find a solution which will meet the legal requirement which has been highlighted by the Ombudsman. There is a project group that was established to look at that, to consult with the people who are affected by this, the people who hold the mobility allowance and the motorised transport scheme, the representative groups to which they belong. That process has been done. There is a report with the Minister for Health on it, and he will bring recommendations to government arising out of it. But I think it is important to be very clear about this. This is not a case where the government is cutting the money. This is not a case where the government is deciding to end schemes. This is a case where the Ombudsman has made a recommendation which states very clearly that the operation of those schemes is outside the terms of the Equal Status Acts, and who has further made recommendations which would have an enormous financial cost attached to them. So what we're trying to do is to find a resolution which will be legal and which will be within the budget that is already allocated for those schemes and which in fact has been ring-fenced.